Washington, from the 18th Congressional District of Illinois, our Congressman, Schock.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be with you this afternoon. And I always enjoy coming to the Morton Rotary. I had the opportunity a couple of times in the primary and then in the general election. And I always find it very interesting to hear your perspective on how things are going in Washington, D.C. I've always said you can't be a good representative if you don't know the people you're representing. And so I've always tried to make a point of coming back to the district as often as I can in my first 6 months. I will tell you that the congressional schedule that I'm getting to experience is a little bit different than my predecessors. Typically, when the Republicans controlled Congress, they were in session Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, which meant that they would go home on Fridays and come back on Mondays, and would have about 4 days in the district, which allows them to get around their districts. Nancy Pelosi believes that the longer we're in Congress, the more that we get done and the better the country is. And so we are in Monday through Friday voting every day. And what that means is that usually when I leave for the airport and arrive in Peoria, it's pretty late on Friday night, and then I have to leave on Monday to get there in time for votes in the afternoon. So it's given me very little time on Saturdays and Sundays to get around the district. I've come back home in the first 6 months every weekend but one. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean I get to come back home to Peoria. Sometimes it means I fly into Quincy or Springfield or Decatur, because I've only got 2 days on the weekend back in the district. So I think it's important to mention that, because some people have said, well, how come you can't come to our Friday meeting or our Wednesday meeting? It's because of our new schedule that we've got right now in Congress. And I'm hoping in 2010 we can change that. I want to give you a little bit of an update on what's going on in Congress, some of the bills that we have voted on, some of them that I see coming through the pipe, and then really want to open up for questions, because I want to talk about what's on your mind. We started this year with a lot of pledges to work together, pledges of a greater level of discourse and bipartisanship than the last administration and the last Congress. And unfortunately, I have to report that I haven't seen that come to fruition. In fact, I would argue that the first 6 months has engendered some of the most bipartisan, or some of the most partisan and core legislation that our country has seen in the last 2 decades. And I want to give you a couple of examples of those pieces of legislation. Many of you know we've been struggling with our economic situation in our country. And there was much debate in Congress about what should be included in the stimulus bill. There was the member in Congress that didn't think we need to pass some form of stimulus bill to help stimulate our economy. Now, there was a big division about what people thought should be in that stimulus bill. Republicans believe that most of that stimulus should be focused on small business. Why? Well, it happens that over 60% of American citizens get their paycheck from a small business. So how can you talk about stimulating the economy if you're not focused on where 60% of Americans get their paychecks? Unfortunately, the lion's share of the stimulus bill that passed went towards expansion of social programs, federal programs that we run, and very little money actually towards infrastructure investment. The president talked about how this was going to be the largest infrastructure investment since Eisenhower became president, and it ended up being less than 8% of the money in the $787 billion package actually went towards infrastructure. Mind you, this was the largest spending bill in our country's history. Many of you know the story of me coming back to Peoria with the president to Caterpillar as he stumped for that bill. That bill was not filed in Congress. In other words, the language of the bill was not filed until 11 p.m. that night when we got off the plane, and it was voted on at 10 a.m. the next morning. That was Bill 1. Then we moved into the stimulus, or the omnibus bill, which is basically the overall budget for the Congress. That bill was filed and debated for less than 2 days. Then you move forward to the next big bill, which is the cap and trade bill. Now, this was a very controversial bill. This is a bill that I think, if passed in its current form out of the Senate and signed into law, will be very detrimental to all of us in Central Illinois. First of all, it puts our largest energy resource which is coal, basically out of business. It puts a huge carbon tax on coal production. Mind you, we are the largest, Illinois has the largest coal deposit in the world. If you look at a map of the state where the coal is, it's basically covered in the Midwest, specifically the state of Illinois from the top to the bottom. And it will basically render that useless under the current provisions in the cap and trade bill. It also puts additional tax on electricity production. Now, at a time of economic downturn, most of us on the Republican side of the aisle believe that the wrong thing to do is to add to the cost of business at a time of economic downturn. Mind you, also, we're in a global economy. And as companies like Caterpillar and others try to compete with their foreign competitors, it becomes more difficult as our country adds taxes and burdens that other countries don't have. And if you truly want to try and limit carbon output, which is the goal of the cap and trade bill, you can't do it as one country alone. And when our largest competitors being Russia, China, Brazil, and India, our largest competitors, refusing to do anything on cap and trade really renders this whole proposal useless, but only furthers to put us at a competitive disadvantage from our global partners, and again adds an additional cost and tax to business at a time where they're struggling to pay. This bill, of course, was rushed through right before the 4th of July holiday. Now why? What the rush? Well, you're seeing why the rush on cap and trade, because when you allow for public input and you allow for reaction time from the public, and your policy is completely out of line and completely out of touch with the American people, they react. And they don't react positively. And when they react, a good politician will listen to their electorate, and their actions will be in line with who they represent. And so there we see the frustration now on the health care bill. The reason that the cap and trade bill had to be passed before the 4th of July holidays is because they knew that if that bill would have had a week, and members would have had a week to go home and hear from their constituents, they would have had the votes to pass cap and trade. Cap and trade passed, for those of you that know, by a vote of 4. 7 votes, but if it swung 4 votes the other way, it would have died. So, fast forwarding to the health care bill now. Many of you know that this was a major priority of the President's, major priority of the Speaker of the House. In fact, the Speaker of the House got a little ahead of herself there in July and said, we have the votes, we're calling for it, and this will be passed before the August recess. There was a bit of a miscalculation on the part of the Democratic leadership in that they didn't quite understand the backlash that many of their conservative Democrats were feeling on the issue of cap and trade. And many of them said, you know what, I'm not voting for this health care bill. I'm not convinced it's the right thing to do. And oh, by the way, my constituents aren't convinced that it's the right thing for them either. And so they pulled off of the bill and forced the Democratic leadership to pull the bill from the docket and not have a vote before the August recess. And now you've seen the course of 12 days since the August recess began, the American people beginning to weigh in during these town hall forums on health care, expressing their concern, expressing their displeasure, and expressing what they believe ought to be the solutions as opposed to what's being proposed in House Bill 3200. The problem for the majority right now is we're on recess, and they can't do anything, and they can't amend the bill. And so with all of the discussions about, well, we could do this, or we could do that, or that's not in the bill, or that is in the bill, the fact of the matter is it's in black and white. It's 1,100 pages thick, but there's a lot of material in there. And I just came from a meeting with area business owners, worked with the NFIB, National Federation of Independent Businesses, to meet with these folks who are concerned about how this bill is going to affect them. And I kind of gave them cliff notes of some of the provisions that are in the bill and how it will adversely affect them. Part and parcel to them operating, of course, is being able to make some semblance of profit and not lose money. And step 1 of the President's proposal is a 8% across the board tax on payroll, which basically decentivizes people to hire people, decentivizes people to pay people more, and is a step in the wrong direction. Only incentivizing people to not do the responsible thing and provide an employer-based health care plan. And I'm sure I'll get questions on health care. I'm not going to get into the weeds too much on that bill.